Hey, welcome back. Today we've got a really fascinating explainer lined up for you. We're going to be merging modern sociological analysis with the deep, sprawling, honestly incredible ancient history of the North American continent. Our big goal today? Unpacking a single, massive concept, American identity. Like, what does it actually mean to be American? And how did a land with tens of thousands of years of continuous human history shape the answer to that exact question today? To figure this out, we're going to lean on the research of political scientist Deborah J. Schildkraut and map it right alongside the continent's own profound historical record. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap. First up, defining American identity and looking at the multiple traditions theory. Then we'll flash way back to the first inhabitants, explore some incredibly diverse indigenous cultures, and trace the impact of European colonization, before finally bringing it all full circle. Section 1, defining American identity. So we're starting our journey right here in the modern sociological landscape. Specifically, we're looking at a pretty landmark study by Deborah J. Schildkraut, who really wanted to see if the increasing ethnic diversity of the U.S. is fundamentally changing how the country defines itself. Which brings us to the central question driving her research. What constitutes American identity today? Now, you might be wondering why this matters so much. Well, in a lot of nations, identity is tied to a single shared ethnicity, a deep ancestral origin, or maybe one religion. But in the US, the modern demographic reality just makes that impossible. And here's how Schildkraut's empirical research actually answers that question. She states, a broad range of constitutive norms define being American. A complex and contradictory set of norms exist. The absolute key word to take away here is contradictory. Because of all these contradictions, it's literally impossible to boil Americanism down to a single, simple measure. The data clearly shows there isn't just one way to be American. The identity itself is essentially this giant mosaic of different and, sometimes totally clashing beliefs and norms. Section 2, the multiple traditions theory. So if we can't just reduce this identity down to a single measure, how do academics actually categorize it? They use this concept, the multiple traditions theory. This theory argues that an increasingly multicultural America essentially engenders a multi-creedal America. Multi-creedal meaning a society defined by multiple overlapping belief systems and traditions rather than just one unifying one. And Schildkraut's results are honestly pretty remarkable. They show that most Americans, completely regardless of their own ethnic or immigrant backgrounds, actually share this complex view of identity. They embrace that multitude of traditions. Let's move to the history and see how this builds. Section 3, the first inhabitants. To really understand why this modern multiple traditions identity exists, we can't just look at the last couple hundred years. We absolutely have to look at the land's deeply diverse roots spanning tens of thousands of years. The prevailing theory suggests human history here kicked off up to 30,000 years ago, right when people crossed the Beringia land bridge from Siberia to Alaska during the Ice Age. These early Paleo-Indians started out hunting Ice Age megafauna, think mammoths. But as the environment changed, they adapted incredibly well. By 8000 BCE, we see the first farming pop up in central Mexico. Fast forward to 5000 BCE, Na-Dene-speaking peoples reached the Pacific Northwest. And by 300 BCE, groups like the Hohokam were already building early villages and even primitive irrigation systems in the Southwest. From day one, this was a continent totally characterized by adaptation and spreading diversity. Which brings us to this number. 575. Today, there are 575 federally recognized tribes in the United States. And that number? It's a direct living legacy of those early inhabitants we were just talking about. Over thousands and thousands of years, those original populations diversified into hundreds of culturally, linguistically, and politically distinct groups. Section 4, diverse indigenous cultures. Because long before any European contact, the continent was home to highly advanced, complex societies that were quite literally as diverse as the geography of the land itself. Now, what's really interesting here is the sheer scale and variety of these civilizations. Take the Midwest. You had the Mississippian culture, totally famous for building these massive earthworks. Their most important city was Cahokia, right near modern-day St. Louis, which had a 100-foot-tall structure called Monk's Mound. At its peak around the 12th century, Cahokia had a population of roughly 20,000 people. To put that into perspective, that was actually larger than the population of London at the exact same time. Absolutely wild to think about, right? Meanwhile, over in the arid Southwest, the Anasazi were constructing these incredibly complex stone and adobe cliff apartments, like the ones at Mesa Verde, some growing to the size of small cities. So you have two completely different environments, fostering two completely distinct, highly advanced traditions. And over in the Pacific Northwest, we see yet another totally unique tradition. Here, affluent indigenous cultures were building permanent villages as early as 1000 BCE. Their economies, and really their spiritual lives, were deeply tied to the centrality of salmon. They're also widely known for this really unique social and economic tradition, the potlatch, which is a highly complex gift-giving feast. Again, it just highlights this vast, incredible cultural spectrum across the continent. Over in the Northeast, specifically upstate New York, political innovation was absolutely thriving. In the mid-15th century, 5 distinct tribes, the Oneida, Mohawk, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca, came together to form the Iroquois Confederacy. This was a super powerful political alliance governed by a really complex representative system of 50 sachem chiefs. We're talking highly organized, continuous societies with incredibly rich traditions of governance, trade, and diplomacy long before the 16th century. Section 5. The European Colonization. Now, the narrative of the continent shifts dramatically in the late 15th century. European arrival added a devastating, deeply complicated, and entirely new layer to the continent's history. The historical record outlines a truly tragic reality regarding early European contact. The primary driver of this devastation wasn't actually military, it was biological. Step 1 was the introduction of new Eurasian diseases, things like smallpox and measles. Step 2 saw these devastating epidemics sweep across Native American populations, who tragically had absolutely no biological immunity to these foreign pathogens. And Step 3 was the resulting massive societal disruption. Millions died, ancient societies were fractured, and this unprecedented population collapse paved the way for large-scale European colonization and displacement. And this brilliantly illustrates how European powers further fractured the geography of the continent. It wasn't just one nation arriving. It was this intense race for territory among multiple empires, and each one brought their own languages, religions, and economic systems. The Spanish established a presence in Florida and New Mexico, utilizing the incredibly harsh forced labor encomienda system. The Dutch settled the Mid-Atlantic in New Netherland, and that capital eventually became New York City. The English arrived in Jamestown in 1607 and Plymouth in 1620. And notably, in those southern English colonies, they began building an agricultural economy that was completely reliant on the brutal system of slave labor, enslaving millions brought over from Africa. So look at what you have now. Deeply rooted indigenous cultures colliding with Spanish, Dutch, English, and diverse African cultures, all on one single landmass. Eventually, those English colonies consolidated their power. Following a revolution against Great Britain, these specific 13 colonies ratified the U.S. Constitution in 1787. This document created the framework for the first modern U.S. government, a government that would, of course, eventually expand westward and fundamentally alter the borders and demographics of the entire continent. Section 6. Synthesizing the American Identity. So we've traced the history from the Ice Age all the way to the Constitution. Now, let's bring this historical flashback full circle and connect it directly back to our initial sociological question from Deborah Schildkraut's research. So the crucial point is really this. Schildkraut's finding that modern American identity is complex and contradictory isn't just some byproduct of recent 21st century immigration. It's the inevitable result of this land's incredibly layered history. A multi-creedal America is a direct reflection of a continent that has hosted tens of thousands of years of incredibly diverse, continuous, and colliding societies. From the Mississippians to the Iroquois, from Spanish colonizers to English settlers, to the forced migration of enslaved Africans, this multiple traditions theory is just as much a hard historical fact as it is a modern sociological one. We want to leave you with this final provocative thought. If American identity has literally never been simple and has always been this complex, evolving combination of multiple traditions, how will the next wave of demographic changes redefine what it means to be American? As the ethnic diversity of the country continues to shift, history tells us the identity will shift right along with it, adding totally new creeds to an already ancient mosaic. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer, and hey, keep asking the big questions.